Riemen. I was born in the Netherlands. My father comes from a poor labor family. He had to go to work when he was 14. A self-made man, became a union leader. My mother grew up in Indonesia, which was then a Dutch colony, and spent the years of the war in a prison or a Japanese camp. She survived, and I was her firstborn. So I grew up basically in a poor, liberal, Catholic family in the Netherlands. That's where I come from. When I was young, I think it was definitely my mother, yes. I mean, she knew about life, right? So I grew up in a family in which, there were some rules or some ideas. The first one was, life in general is not funny. Be aware of that. Secondly, accept the fact that you have to take responsibilities. 3, when life is not funny, but when you accept your responsibilities, never give up. Don't compromise. Do what you have to do. So, with those things, and then for my parents who were uneducated, that the children could get an education, could go to university, was their dream. So when I finally, after a very difficult high school period, which took me 8 years, normally it's 6 years, but it took me 8 years because I really hated it. And finally managed to go to university. I spent 10 years studying, and I still regret that it was only 10 years. It could have been endless. It was just 10 years of reading books. Books. And an old friend of mine once told me that a reader, and in some ways I consider myself a reader, you always start with one book and then you read back. For me that book was The Magic Mountain of Thomas Mann. And so I started to read everything of Thomas Mann, and through Thomas Mann it was channeled to Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Goethe, and trying to become familiar with this whole world and this whole mindset, which now is known as the world of European humanism. And the work I'm doing is basically trying to continue that tradition, trying to transmit the ideas of that world. But in the so-called formative years, I think, I was questioning myself, would I become a secret agent, probably influenced by James Bond, a journalist, investigating the truth. And then finally, I did something which might look completely different, but it's not exactly the case, I think. I started to study theology. By training, I'm a theologian, which I studied for 10 years. But even I'm not a real theologian because my whole work was basically focused on, again, Thomas Mann and that whole world. But two things. A, I grew up in this family of 6 children without money. So my mother, to deal with everything, she learned me to read when I was 3. So essentially I have the feeling that the only thing I can do, and I could do all my life, is reading books. So when I realized, okay, secret agent, I'm missing some skills, probably a journalist. Then my father told me, he said, look, you can always become a journalist, but start, with a huge background. And then I became so fascinated by that world that, I continued that study, although, I'm now publishing a journal. So, I mean, the whole sense of communication is still with me.